when that one blog post hits, and maybe you'll have 2 or 3 of those in a year because you're doing newsjacking on a regular basis, that's when you can make your numbers for the whole quarter in one day as a salesperson. I mean, it's really can be truly remarkable how this process can work.
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. David Meerman Scott, so excited to have you here on Selling with Social. Thank you very much for joining me, my friend.
So it was great to be here, Mario. Thanks for having me on.
So your background, leading marketing and sales speaker for companies and conferences worldwide. You speak at some of the amazing conferences. I've watched you for a long time. You're an author. I think you're on to, is it 10 books now?
10 books, believe it or not. Yeah, 10 books. So, and we can see some of them in the background here.
That's phenomenal. And if I'm not mistaken, the latest stat I saw was actually about 1 million books that you've sold as an author.
I've sold 1 million books, but my books are in now 29 different languages from Albanian to Vietnamese. So those sales have come in a lot of different countries, a lot of different languages. But yeah, it's a lot of books. I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, one day I aspire to be like you.
You are like me in many ways, Mario, and doing things that I don't do. I don't have my own podcast. Congratulations to you for doing that.
Well, thank you, my friend. This will be a fun discussion here. I know also a couple things you should keep in mind. If you were to go and ask him to speak for an hour, we're talking about a lot of cash here. So the fact that we've got you, David, for this next session here with Selling with Social, this episode, it's truly a privilege and an honor to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
So do us a favor. We've got sales, we've got marketers, we've got sales enablement folks. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I started on a bond trading desk in New York City, and I was on a bond trading desk and I used real-time content to trade bonds. And I remember that was my very first job out of college. I remember that distinctly because it was so awesome to be able to use real-time information. This was before the web. And then I worked for various information companies, including parts of Thomson Reuters, parts of Dow Jones. And that gave me a background both in real-time information as well as in how news works. So when I went out on my own about 15 years ago, I focused on writing books and doing consulting and speaking on the whole idea of how to reach people when the moment is right. So as you're a marketer or a salespeople or even a customer support representative, when you're reaching people at the moment they're ready to buy, you can make much more sales as a result. So my whole thing is how to align your marketing and sales with the ways that people buy. Most people are completely out of alignment. Most people are selling when they're ready, not when the market's ready.
Fair point and fair discussion. And we're going to break some of those things down too, in terms of being involved in the marketplace where the market is right. I love that topic. I want to ask you a question. One thing that nobody would know about you by looking at any of your social profiles.
Nothing they wouldn't know about my social profiles. My very first job, even before I was a bond trader, was that I managed a cheese shop when I was in high school and when I was in college. And I've lost some of my knowledge, but I probably know more about cheese than you do, Mario.
My guess is you probably do. I just consume it. That's all I do. I love it. All right.
Cheese. We can go down the cheese path too if you want.
Maybe we'll circle back on that topic then at the close. I love that. That's the first time someone's mentioned that they're a cheese connoisseur.
Yeah. I'm the big cheese head.
I love it. All right. So one of the things I like talking to leading experts such as yourself on is really thinking about the change in buyer behavior over recent years.
Yeah.
How has that affected sales and marketing in today's modern world? And you kind of touched on that just a second ago. Drill down on that for me.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that you obviously know, and probably other guests have talked about the idea that that buyers are now in charge of the buying journey. I mean, that's something that I think everyone who's listening and understands that today. That's not new. The buyer goes to Google when they're ready to make a purchase. They ask their friends and colleagues on social networks when they're ready to make a purchase. They come armed with tons of information when they're ready to buy something or when they're doing their investigations about something that they might be interested in. We all know that. But the thing that I think is fundamentally different in the last, say, 5 years or so is that now we are totally real time. Now we can find out instantly what's happening on our website. Is somebody interacting with our content right now? If they fill out a form on our site, we not only know they filled out the form, but if we have the right tools enabled, we can also find out what content they looked at before they filled out the form. We can find out exactly what pages they were on, exactly what information they downloaded. So when they fill out that form and they raise their hand and say, I'm interested, in real time, we can know what they've been doing. In real time, we can find out what people are saying about our products and services on the social networks, Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and other ones. And then something that I think is absolutely fascinating is in real time, we can find out what's going on in the news. What's happening? We can use Google News, we can use Twitter Moments, we can find out what's happening in our industry as well as in our geography and our industry, and we can find out what are the things that are on buyers' minds right now because of what's breaking in the news. And this whole idea of real-time information is something I think that is so new and different to most people, they're not taking advantage of it. What most people are doing is they have a marketing plan that they plan ahead of time. Right? And you notice they've got their email campaign set for next week, and all they do is next Tuesday they push the button at 4:03 p.m. or whatever time their algorithms tell them to push the time, or they've got a trade show that they're doing next month and they're getting ready for that. You know, they've got a new office opening, they have to write a press release about it. Or if they're a salesperson, they're going to go after everything A to B next week and then C to D the following week, or whatever it is. But what we can do now is we can focus not on selling and marketing on our time, but we can sell and market on the buyer's time if we're aware of what they're doing now and what they might be interested in.
That's a fantastic point that you mentioned in terms of the way the buyer has changed. Interestingly enough, though, I spend most of my time with sales leaders. And last year hosted over 200 different executive meetings with sales executives. That's one of the challenges that sales leaders has brought to the table, is that they have not recognized that the buyer's journey has changed, and that the way they still prospect and the way they still engage with their buying community is the traditional ways that, quite frankly, you and I'll be 40 next month. This is my 20th year in sales. You and I grew up selling the way we've always sold.
Right.
And a lot of sales leaders have done, they're in director level positions and above, have sold the way they've always sold, and they haven't been brought up to speed yet with the changing buyer dynamics, real-time stats, where their buyers are at on the website at that moment in time, being able to use Google News or Moments in Time, or Twitter Moments as an example, finding out what's on the buyer's mind and leveraging that as content. I mean, this is a big deal.
It is a very big deal. And what's interesting to me is that and I'm sure you've had these discussions too, you can be talking to a sales leader about how the buying process has changed, and they'll kind of be pushing back on you with it. But you say, hey, when was the last time you made a major purchase? Have you bought a car recently? Have you bought a set of golf clubs recently? Did you book a vacation for your family recently? Yeah, so everybody has. And they'll talk about what their latest, reasonably big purchase was. I say, well, how did you do that? Did you wait for a salesperson to call, or did you do the research yourself, right? And so they immediately say, well, yeah, of course. I went to Google and I did this and I did that and I did my research and I said, well, yeah, you're not any different. You're also doing that same thing. And I think you've identified what one of the biggest problems is. The biggest problem is that people who are our age get promoted to be the heads of sales, the VP of sales, the sales director, And then we're taking, and I've been guilty of this. I've been a sales representative. I've been a sales leader. We're guilty of then saying, well, what worked for me 5, 10, or 20 years ago was this. So I'm going to coach you in the ways that made me successful. And I think one of the biggest problems is CRM and Salesforce automation systems. The reason I think that they're one of the biggest problems is because not all, but many of the platforms out there were built 5, 10 years ago, and they were built when a salesperson was in charge. They were built when a salesperson had the control of the marketing and the sales information. They had the position of power. And those services were built essentially as ways for the vice president of sales to monitor what their individual salespeople are doing.
Fantastic.
But I think that's a problem because somebody's, and I'm not talking about any particular branded product, but somebody who's a vice president of sales is looking over the virtual shoulder of 15 or 20 salespeople by using their Salesforce automation CRM system, whichever system happens to be in place. And rather than focusing on using those systems to manage the buying process, they're using those systems to manage the selling process. And that's what's leading to this disconnect. Yeah. And if they would build those systems in such a way that they're actually managing the buying process, then it's going to be much, much better. And some of them are. You just have to have one that's been built and optimized recently and not one that's been built and optimized in the past.
That's a fantastic point. The first time that it's ever been brought up here on Selling with Social is,
really?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And actually, quite frankly, I got to admit, I never even thought through that, except for this that I use as an example, Nimble. I think you know John Ferreira.
Yep. Yeah, I know John really well. Yeah, good friend of mine.
We use Nimble, and the reason for that is because the social insights that it brings me to a particular buyer, so I can understand when they're waving the flag, saying, "Hey, we need help," right? But I actually never translated and thought through it until you just said it just right now, David, was how CRM and Salesforce automation tools were built for the past and when the salespeople controlled the process. So
that's right.
You see what's happening and moving things through the sales process, which there still is. I think there still is a sales process.
Sure, of course there is.
But now it leads me to kind of the next discussion point, which is every time I talk to a sales leader and we're looking at a social engagement for a digital sales training, we get automatically loop in the marketing team. And one of the common frustrations that marketing has is sales is not listening to marketing. And so you have this challenge of the alignment is not really coming out to be an aligned marketing and sales organization. And a lot of the things that you just mentioned in terms of like the changing buyer journey, what's happening, how they're engaging, sales leaders are not responding to what marketing is saying that, hey guys, the buyer persona has changed in this way, or the way they're engaging has changed in this way. How do you bridge that gap? How do you bridge the two together?
I think that part of it is sort of a definition of what is marketing and what is sales in this new environment. And this is at least what seems to help me, and also what helps me to describe this when I'm in front of either a sales leader or a marketing leader, or best when I'm involved with both at the same time. So the way I look at it is this. Marketing is using real-time content to reach many buyers at once. Sales is using real-time content to reach one buyer at a time. And many times it can be the same content. So if marketing is complaining that sales isn't doing their job and isn't using the content they're creating, that's a marketing problem. That's not a sales problem. They're not creating the content that's valuable, in my opinion. Sure. So the way I look at it is that a really great marketing team is creating the content that will reach a whole bunch of people at once. So that could be a blog post, a YouTube video, whatever it might be, that can reach thousands or tens of thousands of people at one time. Some of those will become sales leads. Some of those people will subscribe to your blog or subscribe to a YouTube channel or want to follow you on Twitter, whatever it might be. Great. That's marketing. But then when a salesperson has a lead that comes in, or when they generate a lead as a result of the activities they're doing on LinkedIn or however they are selling, then they can curate content in real time to provide that to a buyer at the moment that buyer is ready. So I mentioned earlier this idea that I can find out exactly where people were, and I happen to use HubSpot for my sales and marketing enablement tool. I'm happen to be on their board of advisors and have been since the beginning. But if somebody fills out a form for me on HubSpot as a lead, and they say, "Hey, David, I'd like you to speak at my conference," I can go back and find out exactly which pages on my website they saw before they filled out that form. That's pretty cool. And then, based on who they are, on their social profile, based on what content they've already downloaded, I can then reply to them. And I always reply them instantly as soon as I see that. So if I have a lead that comes in at 5:06 p.m. tonight, I'm going to respond if I get it at 5:06, at 5:07. But I'm also going to link to a piece of content that's appropriate to them, based on what I know they've looked at and based on what I know about who they are. So that's content curation, and I'll frequently send them to a blog post. It might be a blog post I wrote 5 years ago, but it's still a piece of content that's perfectly timed exactly for one buyer at a time. So that's why I say marketing and sales is both about using content in a timely manner, but marketing is reaching many people at once and sales is reaching one person at a time.
Boy, it reminds me, I just was in Cincinnati last week, and I was training a group of sales leaders, and it was sales leaders, sales enablement, and marketing leaders all in the room. And we were talking about the purposes of content and content sharing. And it said exactly what it is that you just said. Marketing is taking the piece and is doing one-to-many, whereas salespeople are taking those same exact pieces and doing one-to-one. And where we live at in this era that we live in is just the era of digital personalization. It is expected that you are going to give me something that is going to offer me a value, not just here's 50 different pieces of information or how can I help you, right? You already know that information. And that's very interesting that we're having this dialogue here in terms of how the changing landscape has changed for sales people and what we should be doing with, quite frankly, content, right?
We must be long lost brothers since we think alike.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll look for that. Well, this will be our opportunity to speak on that topic together here. So that's awesome. But, I want to talk a little bit about changing gears, this concept of newsjacking, which actually goes well in line with what we just spoke about. And that is, you've wrote a book, actually. You launched a book called Newsjacking, and it's become quite popular. And I want to actually take a few minutes to talk about that. So tell me, first off, what is newsjacking and who can use this technique?
Mm-hmm. So newsjacking is what I describe as the art and science of injecting your ideas into a breaking news story. And the reason that you do that is to, number one, get media attention, because the media is always looking for somebody to quote about a story. And if you're an expert, they want to quote you. Number two, to generate sales leads, because if you have some valuable information about a breaking news story, people are going to say, wow, this company's really bright. I think I should do business with them. And three, to grow business. There's no question that newsjacking helps to grow business. So the basic concept is that you're always monitoring what's going on in the news in real time. I personally use Google News, and I use it both on my desktop computer, and I also use it on my mobile phone, which is here somewhere. It's right here as my prop. So on my mobile device, and I'll go to Google News probably 4, 5, 6 times every day.
Interesting.
And I just want to see what's going on in general in the news. I'm not necessarily searching on anything. I'm not doing any keyword research. I just want to see what's going on in the news, because I want to see what's breaking news stories and what might I find either in my geography. I live in Boston. Is Boston Globe writing something that's interesting? Or in my industry, in the whole general sort of startup world, sales and marketing and all that, or just a global story that might be interesting. And that's what anybody can do. Anybody can be checking Google News. And I also go to Twitter Moments, which is sort of the Twitter real-time what's trending feature. And then I also might just check my regular Twitter feed and see what my followers are saying and what seems to be interesting on the people's mind of the 10,000 or so people that I follow on Twitter. And then when I have something that's interesting, it's just a matter of creating a real-time, timely blog post or video or tweet to say your ideas about that breaking news story. If you're lucky, you might get picked up by the media. If you're lucky, you might get a sales lead out of it. But the whole idea here is that you're drafting your ideas off of what's going on in the news.
I wonder, this is probably a very, very, very side note, but how many times does the presidential tweets take the top of the news?
Well, what's really interesting about that, Mario, is in August of 2015 was the first time I wrote about Donald Trump, and I essentially predicted he was going to win. That was about 18 months ago.
Yeah.
And the reason was because at that time, Donald Trump was the only candidate that was acting on social networks in real time. He was the only candidate that was doing newsjacking. He was the only candidate that was following what other candidates were doing and commenting on them in the news. And then throughout the entire campaign, he did that. Some examples of that, which are really interesting, is in the middle of 2016 when the Democrats had their annual convention.
Yeah.
When Hillary Clinton gave her speech, Trump was real-time tweeting her speech. That had never been done before. That's classic newsjacking. And then when President Obama was giving his speech at the DNC, Trump was also live tweeting that. So why is this interesting? It's interesting because Trump is obviously an expert on what's going on there. He's also a candidate. He's running for president from the other party. And the media then has to follow his tweets, and they have to write about him in the same story that they write about Hillary Clinton when she's giving her big speech at her convention. And this is fascinating because all of a sudden, he's taken what every other 4-year cycle, the other candidate would shut up for an entire week and let their competitor have a week to do their convention.
Right.
But Trump didn't do that. Trump said, well, shoot, here's some news. I'm going to comment on it. And yes, you're right. Now that Trump is president, anybody can follow his tweets and anybody can comment on them, and perhaps she'll get mentioned in the news. Now, just one more thought on newsjacking and Donald Trump, which I find pretty interesting. I started, as I said, writing about Trump about 18 months ago. I wrote about him a lot because his marketing techniques absolutely fascinated me. Had nothing to do with politics.
Yep.
Not commenting at all on politics. Doesn't matter who I voted for, who I didn't vote for. The other thing I did is I went to a bunch of events. I went to see Donald Trump live twice. I went to see Hillary Clinton live 3 times. I went to Bernie Sanders. I went to Marco Rubio, John Kasich. I mean, I was like a big geek about this stuff. I live in Boston. So I would go to New Hampshire, where the first primary was in New Hampshire, so the candidates were always up there. And
Right.
then New Hampshire was also a swing state, so I was always up there for New Hampshire events. And so I wrote about Trump a lot. And then on election night, I actually thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. And when Trump won, I'm like, wow, I got to write about this right now. And I because I've been writing about it so long, I was able to bang out a blog post. I pushed the button at 4:30 in the morning, right after the election. So just a couple hours after it was called for Trump. And I said the best marketer was elected president was the headline of the blog post. Well, it turns out that was perfect newsjacking. It's exactly what we're talking about here. It's somebody with some expertise, in this case me, who was able to comment on a breaking news story. In this case, the breaking news story was that Donald Trump was elected president. In this case, I knew a lot about it because I've been following it for 18 months and writing about Trump's marketing for that whole period of time. And I immediately wrote a quick blog post and got it out there. It got written up in about 20 different news stories. So that was newsjacking to get in the media. And I was quoted in a whole bunch of news stories. And then the second thing that happened was really cool. About 2 weeks later, I got an email from an organization in Washington, D.C. that was having their annual conference. And they wanted me to come and give a talk about Donald Trump's marketing techniques. At $25,000, my normal price for a speech, that's not bad for one blog post, right? Write a blog post at 4:30 in the morning and generate some attention in the media and then get a $25,000 speech. So that's exactly how newsjacking works. And every single person who's watching this right now, everybody has an area of expertise that we are a recognized leader for, that we can comment on in a blog or a YouTube video or a Facebook Live post or a Snapchat or a tweet or whatever it might be.
Yeah, without a doubt. But I think if you looked at what Donald Trump has done in terms of marketing, and as you alluded to, the newsjacking, he just takes over the world with one tweet, right? It's like and everybody becomes all consumed. But that goes back to this principle and point that you talked about earlier, which is people are actually out there looking for information to pull and then take action and or respond and or engage, right? As opposed to waiting for someone to feed them the news. For example, if you think about newspapers, every morning we would wake up, we would go to the front door, we would grab our newspaper at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to do what? To read the news that happened overnight and or the day before. That's not even the case anymore. I don't even know if newspapers are still even around. I don't know if you can even get them delivered anymore. I'm sure you could, but I don't. We get it. We get all this information real time, and we're constantly pooling this information, which is very similar to the buyer engagement process. And without a doubt, I said that the night he won, if there was one thing that set him apart, it was the use of social media and how he himself. Without a doubt, hands down. Without a doubt,
absolutely. And there's no question about it, and that's how he won. He wouldn't have won otherwise, because he generated $5 billion worth of free media. $5 billion. That's twice as much as Hillary Clinton and way more than the other Democratic candidates for president. Jeb Bush spent about $200 million on advertising to get 4 electoral votes. Donald Trump spent way less than that on advertising, got all the free attention because he was a real-time marketer. I think it's a fascinating case study. And I think any one of us, any one of our businesses can use the same technique. It's just about being on top of what's happening right now on your website, in the news, on your social channels, and then acting appropriately and quickly to be a part of the discussions that are going on.
So let's break this down a little bit in terms of this concept of newsjacking. You gave a fantastic example, which landed you an opportunity to speak for one blog post, hijacking some of the news related to the presidential election. All right, let's bring this down and to the marketers that are listening, and they're in a specific industry. How do they newsjack content? Is it global market news that they newsjack, or is it market news related to their industry or to their competitor, or where would you direct them to go?
Well, it could be any of those suggestions that you just made. It could be something going on in the global news market. It could be something going on in an industry. It could be even something going on with a competitor. So basically what you're looking for is a news story that you have an appropriate response that you can make in the form of, typically a blog post is good because a blog post is fully indexed. A blog post, you can quickly get it out. You can push the button really quickly. And then blog posts are also good because journalists will sometimes take a quote directly out of a blog post and put it into their story. They are looking for something that makes sense for them to comment on. So let's talk about some of those different examples. Let's talk about your competitors. First of all, you have to be careful with your competitors because you don't want to necessarily say something that's in any way negative about your competitors. You don't want to be seen as trying to undermine your competitors. But here's an example of an organization did a great job with that, a company called Eloqua. And Joe Payne was the CEO of Eloqua when he learned that one of his competitors, a company called Market to Lead, had just been acquired by Oracle. So imagine this, you're a marketer or you're a CEO at a company and your biggest competitor has just been acquired by a giant software company. Well, there's an opportunity to newsjack. What the company did was Joe Payne wrote under his byline, he's the CEO of the company, wrote a blog post talking about his industry and giving some quotes and some stats about the industry so that when reporters were going to write about this acquisition, they had background information that they could quote, but he's the CEO of the competitive company.
Yeah.
So it turns out that his blog post was picked up by a whole bunch of different media outlets, dozens of media outlets, including PC World and Information Week and a bunch of different blogs. And that generated $1 million worth of new business, $1 million worth of new business from one blog post. So that's an example of what you can do around your competitors. So you need to be careful with competitors because you don't want to be seen as trying to undermine them or start any kind of fight or anything like that. And in Joe Payne's case with this example with Eloqua, he didn't do any of those things. He just said, hey, here's what's going on in our industry. Great that Oracle bought into this industry because it's a fast-growing industry and basically provide some additional data that they could quote. So a bigger, wider news story, what's going on in the news today. As we're filming this over the weekend, United Airlines got in trouble because they refused to let young women, actually I think they're teenage girls, onto the airplane because they were wearing yoga pants, right? So this became a really big story. So if you're an airline, or if you make yoga pants, oh my gosh, what an opportunity, right? So this is a global story. Everybody's talking about freaking yoga pants, right? It's a global story, but it's only happening right now. Right now, it's as we're recording this, is the story is hot. The story as we're recording this, Mario, is about 24 hours old. By the time people are listening to this, it's way past its sell by date.
Sure.
But if you saw that story yesterday, and you make yoga pants, you sell yoga pants, you run a yoga studio, what an interesting opportunity, because United Airlines said, we're going to ban these 3 people from getting on the airplane because they're wearing yoga pants. It was then tweeted. It then became a huge news story. It was in the top of Google News for a couple hours yesterday. If you had then created a blog post talking about some aspect of yoga pants and then linking it to United Airlines and kind of I would use humor in this case, in a humorous way, who knows what could happen? You could get picked up by the media. You could end up having people who want to buy your yoga pants. I mean, all sorts of cool stuff that can happen. So that's what you might consider doing around an international story, so a big kind of story. I would caution you, however, to be very careful of any global national stories that have a negative connotation, especially anything with death or destruction of property, things like that. You need to be very, very careful. So be wary of things like wildfires or people getting killed or hurricanes, tornadoes, snowstorms where people lose their lives, things like that. You have to be very, very, very careful unless you have a legitimate tie to that story. In that case, it's okay, but you need to really, truly have a legitimate tie to the story, because there are some people who have gotten in trouble for inappropriately newsjacking a story where it was seen in bad taste that they were trying to take advantage of something where somebody perhaps sadly lost their lives or lost their property.
Yeah, and probably a good example of appropriate use might be that the company decides that they're going to fund or give or help in some way, right? And as soon as the news breaks, that they want to be part of the solution as opposed to just talking through the challenges that is happening.
As long as that's seen as appropriate, then I think you're absolutely right. And I'll actually give you an example of just that. When Hurricane Sandy barreled through the East Coast a couple of years ago, there were a number of companies that tried to newsjack that inappropriately. So, for example, American Apparel did a Hurricane Sandy sale. Bad idea. Where they gave anybody who lived in the states that Sandy came through 20% off their online purchase. But people died. 50 people lost their lives. A million people were without power or were forced out of their homes.
Yeah.
There were tens of thousands of people who actually lost their homes, at least temporarily. They couldn't live in their home. It's not a good idea to try to market a 20% off sale in the back of that. However, Duracell, the battery company, they had recharging trucks that were branded Duracell on the side, and they went to the places that were hardest hit during Hurricane Sandy. They pulled the truck up, and for no charge, you could recharge your mobile devices, your mobile phone, your iPad, whatever you have, and they would recharge it for you. And everyone's without power, but in some cases, the cell phone networks were up. So people thought this was fantastic because, wow, this company, they're a battery manufacturer. They're not trying to sell me batteries. They're recharging my mobile device for free. That's great. And they got a lot of attention as a result. The media picked up on that. I'm talking about it now. There are lots and lots of people who talked about it on social media. So That's an example of something appropriate. If you're a battery company and there's a power outage and you provide people with free recharging stations, awesome. But don't use what American Apparel and other people did of try to run a sale based on that.
Yeah, makes total sense. What about the salesperson? How can a salesperson use Newsjacking? You gave some fabulous examples of if I'm part of the corporate marketing team, if I'm an executive, I'm using industry news versus global international news. How does a salesperson jump on the concept of using Newsjacking to be part of a discussion?
So I think what's important there is that the salesperson needs to keep in mind or keep a database of two different things. Number one, what are the individual potential customers that they're working with and what are their interests? And how can they be prepared if there's a breaking news story to send somebody a piece of information that's appropriate at a particular time? And then number two, how can they be ready at a moment's notice to send a broadcast message to a lot of people when the moment is right? So what I mean by all of that is that a salesperson, if there's a story in the news that is related to the business that they're in, that they could either write something up themselves or they could get the marketing department to create something that they could repurpose. Like, for example, let me give you an example. A company might be in the internet security business, security software. And, every couple of months you read about a big breach of security. We hear about that. Seems like every couple of months, some company's data is stolen. Yep. So if you're in the internet security business, just be prepared that the next time that there's a public security breach that everybody hears about because it's in the news, you as a salesperson should be getting onto LinkedIn and writing up a quick LinkedIn blog post and sending it to all of your LinkedIn followers saying, hey, this security breach happened. Here are my 5 points about how you can protect yourself. So they're seen by their potential customers, and by the way, they should connect with people, their potential customers on LinkedIn, but then they're seen by their customers as a trusted advisor because they're giving the 5 points, the 5 pieces of advice of what you should do. And of course, they're in the internet software business. So naturally you think, well, maybe I should contact this person, make sure I'm protected. Then the second thing would be that rather than a broadcast message, if you see something going on in the news that's related to just one of your customers. So for example, something is going on in a particular geography where that customer is located or that customer's particular industry, then you can be prepared to send them a personalized message saying, hey, we just noticed this happening. I just wanted to make sure you saw this. By the way, this is what we do, blah, 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 blah. So there's lots of different ways that a salesperson, individual salesperson, can take advantage of this idea of newsjacking. But what works the best, and I've seen it work so many times brilliantly, is when marketing and sales work together. Because somebody in the marketing team creates a video or a blog post that's really timely, and then they alert the salespeople, okay, this is it, get it out there. And then the salespeople push it out to their email lists and they push it out through their LinkedIn and through their other social networks that they happen to be on. And you know what? It can happen anytime. It can happen at night. It can happen on a weekend. It can happen on a vacation. It can happen when the boss is away. It can happen on Thanksgiving Day at turkey time. I mean, you never know when that breaking news story is going to happen. So you always have to be prepared to do it.
If I might say, David, probably the best piece of advice I've heard so far on this one is marketing has got to be partnered with sales. And somebody in the marketing organizations, a lot of sales folks are afraid to publish content, especially with the concept of newsjacking.
Yep.
Because they don't want to get into trouble, right? I might say something that is inappropriate or that might, push the company over the edge. And I think marketing, this, CMO has got to be thinking about these concepts and say there is somebody or two people on my team that is assigned to quote unquote newsjack stories so that we can utilize this content in real time, get it out to our sales folks so that they can turn around and use it across their social networks. But as we said earlier, with one-on-one communication directly into their individual buyers or prospects. And
when it happens that way, it's brilliant. I mean, it's really, really fantastic, actually. And every time you newsjack, you're not going to be successful. So I really want to make this one particular point. People say, David, I love these newsjacking stories. I mean, my gosh, you wrote a blog post and you got a speaking gig as a result of it. You know, this guy wrote a blog post and he generated $1 million worth of business. I mean, now you make it sound easy. Well, guess what? It is easy. And you can also achieve this kind of result. But I look at it very much like the way a venture capitalist funds companies or a movie studio invests in movies. If a venture capitalist wants to find a company that's going to go public and make them millions and millions and millions of dollars, they have to invest in 20 or 30 or 40 companies to do that, right? Because they don't know which one of their investments is going to make it happen. Exactly right. And same thing with a movie studio. A movie studio doesn't invest in one movie and they know that's going to become the blockbuster. A movie studio invests in 10, 20, 30 films over the course of a year, and then they're hopeful that one of them will be a blockbuster. If one company goes public, it pays for all the other investments for the VC. If one movie becomes a blockbuster, it pays for the other movies that didn't do so well. I think the same theory is true of newsjacking. So if you write 20 blog posts, each one of them is on a timely news topic, those will be 20 valuable pieces of content no matter what. They'll still be indexed by Google. There'll still be information that will be valuable. There'll still be things that will be interesting to your readers. If you have a broadcast email list for your blog that you've got 20 different blogs going out there, that's wonderful. But 1 out of 20 might take off. Go viral. The media will pick up on it. You'll make sales as a result of it. And you don't know necessarily which blog post that's going to be. And then if like you said earlier, when marketing ties up with sales, it's brilliant because when that one blog post hits, and maybe you'll have 2 or 3 of those in a year because you're doing newsjacking on a regular basis, that's when you can make your numbers for the whole quarter in one day as a salesperson. I mean, it's really can be truly remarkable how this process can work.
Second best piece of advice right there is that write it so that you can actually use it as blog posts on your website and leverage it as great, valuable SEO content. But remember that you're going to get, as you said, 1 out of 20 that are going to hit large and go big for the company or for yourself as a salesperson. And
the ones that don't are still valuable. It's not like they were a fail. They weren't a fail. They're still interesting blog posts, but they're just a typical blog post that does fine. It's 1 out of 20 or whatever the number is. It could be 1 out of 10, 1 out of 25, whatever it is. But every once in a while, you're not really sure which one. It's going to be whammo and you get a hit. And then the other thing that's just interesting to point out, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it once more, you have to be ready when the moment is right. And that moment might be tonight at 10 p.m. It might be this weekend, Saturday afternoon at 5 o'clock when your kids have a soccer game. It might be when the boss is on vacation. You know, you've just got to be ready when the moment's right.
Yeah, that's a great point. I personally have not leveraged this concept, and I think it's fabulous. I see how others, such as yourself, influencers and leaders, are utilizing some of the concepts that you've talked about. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to figure out what my next newsjack is, and I'll share it with you. And just tell me if I did it right. Would that be all right?
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to do that. You got it.
I love it. That's great. And also, even if you're a salesperson and you're leveraging some of the strategies that David mentioned here, at the end of the day, even if it didn't take off and go viral, even if it didn't provide you the next opportunity into your sales funnel, what it does do at a very minimum is help build your personal brand.
Absolutely right.
And that is priceless in terms of opportunities. And everybody who's listening knows my story, how I got discovered. And it happened as a result of publishing one blog post. That was a conversation with my 5-year-old, now 6. And that's how the company got started. Right. So you never know where it can lead up to, and you never
know. Exactly right.
This is a fabulous conversation. I want to close with a couple of questions. Number one piece of advice you'd give to marketing or sales leaders listening right now.
It's not advice, it's an observation. This stuff is fun. I mean, gosh, I've been a marketer and a salesperson back in the era when it wasn't fun. I mean, making a brochure is not fun. Cold calling for me is not fun. but following the news and figuring out what stories I have an area of expertise around, and then maybe making money from it, that's fun. So enjoy it, make it a part of your life, and because it can be a really exciting and fun part.
I love that. If someone wants to connect with you, reach out, ask you any questions, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, first of all, if you want to know more about Newsjacking, I encourage you to go to newsjacking.com. And on there, I have some free resources. There's a wonderful graphic that I made that you can download for free. And there's a chart that you can download for free. I also have a master Newsjacking course, online course, that you can subscribe to on that site as well. On Twitter, I'm DM Scott. DMSCOTT, and David Meerman Scott. Just Google my name. All sorts of wonderful things pop up.
And we'll make sure we put all of those links and even your Twitter handle. We'll make sure that they go into the show notes. And by the way, the graphic, I spent actually a good 20 minutes just like sitting there looking at the graphic and studying it as I was preparing for this podcast. I was like, wow, I wonder if I had done this with this news story, what would have happened, right? So my juices started flowing. I loved it. It was a fantastic graphic. And so we'll make sure for all the listeners, just check the show notes here for this particular podcast, and we'll make sure all of those links are inside there. David, I'd like to ask one final question to all of my guests, and this is going back to on the personal side. What is your all-time favorite movie that inspires you, or just all-time favorite movie, period?
My all-time favorite movie, and I'm gonna answer this just in an odd way. I'm gonna take my computer here, and I'm gonna take you and show you something. My all-time favorite movie is a movie called Marley, and the reason is because I took this photo. This was the only known photo at Bob Marley's last concert. There's the concert ticket, and I was the only person who took a photo at Bob Marley's last concert. It was 1980. I was in college. I road tripped it to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then this is a social media story too. And Bob Marley, of course, died about a couple months after the concert I went to in 1980. And they released a CD of that concert, Bob Marley at Stanley Theater. And I got the CD, and when I got the package, this is 5 years ago, the picture on the package was not the same clothing that Marley was wearing, that photo I just showed you. And I said, wow, he's not wearing the right photo. This isn't the right photo. This wasn't from the show. Here's the social media part. I left a comment on the Amazon listing, and I said, the cover of the album is not the right clothing because I was there and I shot photos. And then a year later, I got contacted by the producer of the Marley documentary. And he said, David, do you have photos? We don't have any record at all of that final concert. Wow. So I said, sure, I've got a whole roll of photos. So they bought the photos from me. I got paid. And then I ended up getting a credit in the movie, went to one of the premieres. And so I just think it's incredibly cool that, number one, I happened to be the only photographer there. Number two, despite preparing properly for a Bob Marley concert, I was still able to focus the camera. And number three, that social media in the form of leaving the comment on the Amazon listing led to a movie producer buying the rights to my photos and putting them into the film. It's got 2 minutes in the film of my photos. So
and your name is on the scroll, right? I mean,
my name's yeah, absolutely. I got it credit. Yeah,
that's a great story. I love it. Fantastic. That's a great story. Well, listen, David, you have been an awesome guest here. I really enjoyed this conversation with
Thank you, Mario.
Everybody. Feel free to make sure you reach out to David Meerman Scott, and also the website to purchase your book. David, what is that again?
You can just go to Amazon to get the books, or davidmeermanscott.com is my website. And then the Master Newsjacking course, which is everything you need to know about newsjacking, is at newsjacking.com.
I highly recommend all the marketers and sales folks that are listening to take that course. David Meerman Scott, you are the man. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for joining me on Selling with Social today, my friend. Take care, buddy.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Selling with Social podcast. I'm super pumped that you are our guest today. Here's what I want you to do right now. Go to jr.com/podcast and support our podcast, please, by distributing it out anywhere you can get it to on social. And don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes. You'll find all the instructions there on the site on how to subscribe to the Selling with Social podcast. Until the next show, keep on rocking. Mario Martinez Jr. out.